And so we're going to take a couple weeks of looking at the book of Esther. Today, I want to look at kind of the broader aspects of the story, and then we'll hone in on some details week to week. I think Rodney's going to be out for a couple weeks with some other things going on, and so he's asked me to step in for the first two Sabbaths of the month. So I got this one and then the next two, and I think I'm going to stay focused on Esther for a little bit of time. What I want to suggest to you is this story of Esther is not just a nice little cute story about, this young lady that comes into power. She does a great thing by the will of God. That's not the only thing that's happening, because the story of Esther very much mirrors what's happening across the universe, because we are in a great controversy. There is a conflict that is happening across the whole universe between good and evil. And if you were to look at Revelation 12, 7 through 9 says, "And there was war in heaven, and Michael and his angels were waging war with the dragon. And the dragon and his angels waged war, and they did not prevail, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that serpent of old, who is called the devil, and Satan, who deceived the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him." You see, really what we are a part of is a cosmic conflict. We are a part of this big battle between right and wrong, good and evil, that Lucifer instigated in heaven. One little piece that stood out to me as I was just looking at Revelation 12, I don't know if you know this or not, but there are many, many, many denominations that do not, when they read this verse in Revelation 7 or 12:7, it says, "And Michael and his angels waged war." They don't see the term as Michael as Jesus. And that always surprises me, because it seems pretty clear when you read this that there is this figure that is doing war against the dragon. And of course, the opposition is between God and Lucifer. There's not a lot of middlemen in this conflict. So that always interests me, that there's many, many people. And when I looked up what Michael means in the original language, it means one who is like God. And you can read that two different ways. One, you could read it as Michael saying, "I am the one like God." Because what was Lucifer's claim? That he wanted to be like God. Or it could be a little bit of a play on words, and it could be read as a question. Who is like God? And of course, Lucifer, that's what his desire would be. And so in the very name of Michael, you have this kind of like this argument happening. Who can be like God? Only God. And then archangel. Some people would say that, it has the word angel in it, and Jesus is not an angel. He's not a created being. Well, the word is archangel, which means chief messenger. And I don't know if there is a better messenger than our gospel-providing God, Jesus Christ, who came to the earth to deliver a message of salvation. So anyways, that's kind of a side little bunny trail that my mind went on. But it always surprises me as you read through these things that there are groups that say, "Oh no, that's an angel. That can't be talking about God or Jesus." But who else has the power to stand against the devil but God? So we read through Revelation 12. We know that there's this cosmic conflict, this war taking place in heaven, and we jump to Isaiah 14, because while Revelation 12 tells us that there is a conflict, Isaiah 14 tells us kind of the why there's a conflict. It gives us a little bit of an understanding of Lucifer's motivations. 14:12 through 14 says, "How you have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning, son of the dawn. You have been cut down to the earth. You have been weakened. You have weakened the nations. But you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God, and I will sit on the mount of the assembly in the recesses of the north, and I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. So Isaiah isn't just telling us that Lucifer did fall, but he gives us the picture of why did he fall. And if you listen to the progression of these I statements, it says, I will ascend, I will raise my throne, I will sit on the mount, I will ascend to the heights, I will make myself like the Most High, which is God. Lucifer was created to be a perfect angel. He was created to lead out in the worship service of heaven. Every day, he got to stand in the presence of God and marvel on the power of God, the goodness of God. And yet, somewhere in his heart, he had discontent. He wasn't happy with his place of glorifying the Creator. He wanted more for himself. And discontent can get each and every one of us. Maybe we're not happy with our living situation. Maybe we're not happy with the people we live with. Maybe we're not happy with our finances. Maybe we're not happy with our church congregation. Maybe we're not happy. When we are discontent, it brings grief, it brings jealousy, it makes us look for opportunities to serve ourselves. Like, I deserve something. So be very careful when you get into that mood of things aren't good enough, because it can quickly, when we focus on ourselves, lead to rebellion. You see, Satan didn't want God's character. He wanted God's position. He didn't want to be holy like God. He wanted to sit on the throne of God. He didn't want to love like God. He wanted to be worshiped like God. And he definitely didn't have God's humility that he would send his very own son to this miserable, old, wretched world to die on a cross. No, he wanted God's authority. And that is where this battle scene takes place, or begins. It begins in heaven. We call it the Great Controversy. And I think that as you read through the 10 chapters of Esther, you're going to see that there's some parallels between this conflict that started in heaven and the one that is happening in hallways and courts and in the realm of Persia. So that's kind of the theme that we're going to be looking at, that there's some parallels happening here. Because we're not just reading about a young woman who eventually obtained some level of power, of authority. We're looking at a battle that stretches from heaven straight to Persia, and it lands here with us today. Did you know, as you read those 10 chapters, that God's name in any form is not mentioned? Not one time is God mentioned directly, overtly, in the book of Esther. Isn't that surprising? But you, like me, if we looked outside and we saw the wind blowing, we would see the wind rustle the branches. We'd see the wind move the leaves across the highway as they drop from trees and blow around. And that's the impact of God in this story. Because while he is never mentioned, his impact is felt. We see his fingerprints on everything. We saw it when Esther was adopted by her cousin. We see it when Mordecai recognizes there's an assassination plot and he goes to those in authority and says there's a problem. We see it again as the king, he's rolling over back and forth in his bed at night and he says, bring me those records. I want to read the book of the law of what has transpired this year. And there it is, that story of Mordecai telling him, someone wants to kill you. And the timing of Esther going before the king and inviting the king and Haman to her house for a banquet, It was perfect timing. It wasn't a coincidence. And then finally, you may not remember this part because I forgot it when I read it. But Haman, when he conspires to end the life of all the Jews, when he sits down with all the other princes, leaders, whoever they were, lawmakers, and he says, we need to draft a law to destroy the Jews. They are trouble. Did you know that they threw lots? They rolled a dice, so to speak, to pick the day that the edict would happen. Perfect timing so that there was enough time for God to put his plan into motion. So that Esther could come before the king, could have the banquet, could catch Haman in all of his lies. God wasn't absent in this story, even though he's not mentioned. And for you and me, when we're stuck in our discontent, in our hurts, our pains, and we feel like, where is God? Why is God silent? I want you to think on the story of Esther, how God's presence is felt through this whole story, despite the appearance that he's not there. Because he was always there. He was with the Jewish people as they entered exile. He's with you and me. If you've been from a broken home, he walks beside you. He is there when unjust systems come up against the helpless. And even in places where his name is not spoken, there are places in the world that do not have a Christian message, but he's there. He's present. Chapters of your own life probably started with the feeling of, where is God? Why isn't he acting? And the truth is, he was acting. He was putting a plan into motion for your good. We just didn't see it yet. Esther, she comes from a situation of grief, a broken home. She had to be adopted by her cousin because her family was gone. And not only her family, but the Jewish people were broken up into pieces and scattered. And some of them were now living in Persia. Her history wasn't a happy one. But the timing of God intervening and placing her in that home was perfect. And in the story, the famous words by Mordecai were, you have been called for a time such as this. And she may have thought, what are you talking about? Because Esther may have been known as a beautiful young lady, but her qualities probably really hadn't had a chance to bloom yet. Her intelligence, her character, they hadn't really gone through the fire, so to speak, to be strengthened. And so she gets thrust onto the scene and has to act decisively, despite her young age, despite her lack of experience. And she did something after Mordecai suggested that it was time for her to act. She didn't just barge in on the king. She didn't just say, I'm the queen now and you're going to do what I say. She stopped and she found herself in prayer. Prayer for 3 days. And in Esther 4:16 it says, go gather all the Jews who are found in Susa. Fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens also will fast in the same way. And I will then go to the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. She didn't just gather her closest friends and say, we're going to have a little prayer circle. No, she sent out a message to the whole town, the whole region. And she said, we're in this together as a people. So her act of faith was really an act of witness. Because by standing on what she knew was right, by asking for support from those that were, an extended vantage from her, she's really sharing that this is what you should do when you're in troubled times. When troubled times come, you need to find yourself in prayer. And so for all the people, all the Jews of Susa, They stop and they pray. Because their demise, their fate was sealed. Haman had managed to get that law passed. The signet ring had gone onto the document. The law now said that you shall all die on a certain day. That was it. There was no going back. The story reads, the law of Persia cannot be changed once it is written. Which is very similar to the way the law of God is written. It doesn't change. So as she walks slowly down the hallway, headed towards the king's throne room, she doesn't know what awaits her. And my Bible tells me that there is no greater love than to give your life for a friend. And effectively, that's what she was doing. She put herself in harm's way for her people. So as you face moments of doubt, hardship, fear, I want you to remember the bravery of this young lady as she steps out, not just in courage, but in faith. Because it's easy to do things with a little bit of adrenaline and say, oh, I'm cool. Philippians 4:6 says, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication. With thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. Those are the very moments that the will of God will be seen. When we find ourselves weak and incapable, and yet we stand on faith and we move forward, whether or not it costs us. So in the story of Esther, we see there are two laws at work. So Esther, she steps into the throne room and she doesn't know what's going to happen. This could be it. The king could decide, you have broken the law of appearing before me without permission. Instead, he extends his scepter, which, by the way, in the original language means rod. So as you read through the scriptures and you encounter that term rod, it's representative of authority, of power. And in this case, it extends grace. Without that intervention of grace, the penalty is death. And even after all of this, fast forwarding through the story, even after all of these things transpire, they have their dinner, not once but twice. Haman is caught. He's taken to the gallows and hanged. But the decree against the people still stood. Death was still waiting for them. So the king, with the help of Mordecai and Esther, a second decree. It's a decree of life. It's a decree of authority and protection that the Jewish people now can gather together. They can arm themselves. And if somebody decides that they're going to show up at somebody's door to accost them, well, now the Jews have the right to defend themselves. And really, I think the gospel message can be seen in those small actions, maybe major actions. Because Ezekiel 18:4 says, and this is basically the decree that was presented after the Garden of Eden, the soul who sins shall die. The wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. No power could undo the law of death. That if you transgress against the will of God, you will die. But through Christ, through his perfect life, through his sacrifice, his resurrection, there's a new decree. And it's not a decree that was sealed with ink or wax, as the king's signet ring did on that document the day that the Jewish people were sealed for death. No, it is a seal made with the blood of Christ. And so for us today, we have something to stand on. We get to stand on what Jesus did for each and every one of us. You see, because what could have been against us has now been addressed. Those wages of sin Jesus took on himself. And now we can live a spiritual life in him. So even though Haman was hanged, or I should say, Haman was hanged, not even though. Haman was hanged by his own mechanism to defeat Mordecai. And you know, Lucifer kind of faced a similar situation because it was his pride that got him too. And as he created a plan to destroy Jesus, that plan backfired. And the plan of Lucifer led Herod to try to chase down those baby boys, and it led ultimately to the people taking Jesus and hanging him on a cross. Very similar to how Haman was hung on his own gallows. And someday, that plan to destroy Jesus will be accounted for. And Lucifer's plan will have failed because it was through that very cross that we receive salvation. What the enemy meant for destruction, God rewrote as deliverance. And the story continues from there, because Haman, the second decree is made for life for the people. But there's now a responsibility placed on Mordecai, on Esther, because they have the right to live now. They can protect themselves. And they could have just backed off into the shadows of the story. But instead, they had to step up and be spiritual leaders for their people. You and I have received a similar gift of life. And it's our responsibility, as we have received life in Christ, to now do something with it. We have responsibility to go out in the name. Mordecai was given great power. He was made to be one of the leaders of Persia, which is really pretty impressive. You go from, maybe working at the front gate to being in a power of authority where you can seal law into place, you can oversee things. And the same God who placed authority, he's given you spiritual authority as well. Luke 10:19 says, "Behold, I give you authority over all the power of the enemy." Matthew 16:19 says, "I will give you the keys of heaven." In 2 Corinthians 5:20, you are ambassadors for Christ. So hopefully you're out there representing. Revelation 1:6, he's made us kings and priests to his God and Father. You're not powerless. You're not like the Jewish people at the beginning of the story. You're not like Esther, just homeless and hoping somebody will adopt you. You've already been adopted. You've already been brought into the family. So now you need to use your authority that God's given you to bring others into the kingdom. And you have been placed for such a time as this, because the conflict continues. Lucifer is out there waging war for hearts and minds. And we get to be a part of that story of fighting back against his wiles and deceptions. So go out and in your sphere of influence, impact others to learn about a saving grace in Jesus. Don't choose fear, choose faith. Esther, she could have just said, I don't think I can do this. But instead she found herself in faithful prayer, which overcame any fear she might have had. So today, as you leave, remember, you're an ambassador for Christ, and he's given you authority. Authority over so many things. We could do a whole lesson on spiritual gifts. So use your impact for bringing others to Christ. You'd bow your heads with me. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you again